Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z, and tonight we are talking about the psychics of Supernatural. But before we dive in, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Carole.
Hi, I'm Carole Stokes. I'm a Supernatural fan since season 3. I've been writing fanfic since 2012, which can all be found on AO3 under Fire Sign 10.
Okay, Ann?
Hi, I'm Ann Wicker, and I came late to the Supernatural fandom, but dived right down that rabbit hole. I'm a former journalist and currently a writer and editor, and I'm a Dean girl, and let's talk about psychics.
All right. I'm Gail Z. and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write male paranormal romance. Across all the genres, there are a lot of psychics with all of the different kinds of powers, or at least many of them. And I came late to Supernatural as well, falling in love with it in the middle of season 11 and fell down the rabbit hole. Haven't quit falling yet. Hope I never do. And all of my modern worlds are ones that Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. So psychics, let's talk first about the different kinds of psychic ability, because we didn't see a one-size-fits-all psychic. You know, sometimes when people say psychic, they think, well, this is a crystal, somebody who uses a crystal ball or reads tarot cards or palm reader. And we've seen all of that, but we've also seen a lot of other types. So what were some of the most unusual psychic gifts that you saw in the series? Carole?
Well, gosh, as far as unusual, I think we expect certain things like premonition, you know, and things like that. I guess for unusual, I would say Lily, who was one of the special children of Kolduk, because really her special ability was she killed people with her touch, which was not too great for her. And but unusual, that was not something we saw all that often. Probably along those lines too would be Jimmy Tomorrow, who was in The Mentalist, all the psychics in Lilydale, and he was a necromancer, so he too was really focused more on dealing with the dead, and I think that's just not as common. People are like so wild about dealing with the dead.
I agree, and they call what Lily was able to do necrokinesis, which that was a new word for me. And so, yeah, I think that's pretty interesting and pretty different. And the other thing is that Pamela Barnes, her powers weren't exactly defined. You know, she was trying to do the seance-y kind of thing when her eyes got burned out, but then when she was, and I watched part of it today, Heaven and Hell, when they were trying to figure out, and I just blanked on her name, that she was they didn't know she was an angel.
Anna.
And she was using hypnosis. Can't say that word, hypnosis. And so Pamela had a variety of gifts, and then she sent Sam and Dean, you know, into the not underworld, but
astral plane.
Astral plane.
The astral plane.
Yeah. So I thought, and we didn't see much astroplaning in Supernatural either.
Well, and you know, you mentioned Lily, which really reminded me of Rogue in the X-Men, because she had a similar kind of thing, but that's a superhero world, which we don't usually think of superheroes as being psychics per se. Those are superpowers. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was an interesting one. We had a couple of really strange ones with, if you remember Fred Jones in Hiro Hirochi, who could warp reality and throw you into a cartoon, which proves that would be painful if it were real. And then poor Magda who could inflict stigmata on people, which they said is biokinesis. And she just had a really powerful ability to connect with people, but she didn't know her own strength to not overwhelm them and kill them with it, which sucks. So I think that's one of the things that we've seen with a lot of these gifts is A, they're not really fun to have, and B, if you aren't trained or you don't know your own strength, you can accidentally cause an awful lot of harm to other people and yourself. So who were some of your favorite psychics? We actually saw a lot of people, if you go beyond that predict the future definition and you look at all these different types of psychic ability, actually an awful lot of folks, including our own Sam Winchester.
Well, my favorite, other than Sam, of course, is Mosley. I mean, she, and I, you know, we've talked about this in other panels that we wish we had seen a lot more of her, but unfortunately the actress was committed to other projects and couldn't be on the show so much. But there could have been myriad storylines with using her gifts of, what did they say? Clairsentience, which is, that's how she identified the poltergeist, and premonition and telepathy. I don't remember her having telepathy as much, but that's.
Well, she would look at Dean, for instance, and she'd be like, you know, he would think something and she'd be like, don't you think that?
Oh
like,
yeah, don't put your feet on my table.
The furniture, and she's like, oh no, you know, so no, she did have some of the.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Well.
I forgot about that.
They just didn't make a big deal about it, but
Yeah. And I have to say that of course, Pamela was a favorite of mine. And I actually really I really liked Magda. Is that her name? I mean, she was just, the poor thing, you know, was with all the religious stuff, it was just heart-rending to me. And I think to Sam, I mean, he really felt so bad for her being, you know, kept in the basement, and just, you know, that was just truly horrible to me.
Well, and I thought it was interesting because it definitely made the point that if you didn't know about the possibility of psychic powers and you came at the world as a whole with an extremely religious viewpoint, depending on what that religion was, you were kind of pre-programmed to think things were automatically good or evil as opposed to what you did with it, and to not look into understanding or learning how to use a gift as opposed to trying to shove it away. And that never works out well. So I thought that was also a very interesting thing with Magda, was that because of how she was raised, she really didn't get much of a chance to learn how to use her gifts in a way that didn't hurt anyone, including herself.
And I think I had read even that the accident that led them to leave the more normal life they used to lead before they became these, you know, rural farmer fundamentalists and everything, that she was actually responsible for that accident. So I'm sure to them that was a sign that it was evil, you know, and so because she had this happened, and so that must mean she's bad, you know. So she never had a chance to then, you know, try and get away from that perception of her.
And
I'm sure.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just sure Sam is looking at her thinking that could have been me.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, being raised in a hunter, you know, and people could have, if they'd known about him, they would easily have been like, oh, well, we got to lock him in a basement because he's evil, because he's a monster. So I'm sure he just empathized with her so much, looking at her thinking that could have been me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just rewatched that episode today, and it was something that Magda did that made her mom veer into traffic, but it wasn't something she did on purpose. It was like she
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
But they just don't, you know, they're just like, oh, this is not good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
Max Barnes, who had the telepathy and could, float knives at people. Sam's comment was, hey, that could have been us if a little more tequila, a little less hunting, because he had such a horrible childhood. And
Mhm.
then if you find out you can throw knives at people with your mind, that would be tempting.
Nothing like getting back at your abusers.
Oh,
Yeah. So who else have we seen? We did see a bit of Fred Jones there, of course, named after the voice actor, who was
Oh, I didn't know that.
oh yeah, Fred Jones, who did like all the Scooby-Doo voices and everything. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
that's really
I didn't
nice.
know that either.
What a
Cool.
nice little tribute.
Yeah, he did Scooby's voice and Fred's voice in Scooby-Doo for a long time, but he did voices for everything. So yeah, that was definitely an Easter egg. But
Oh,
in that case, the character was basically in a coma and his mind was off doing all these things, which was kind of an interesting take on psychic abilities, where your mind goes off and has a vacation without you.
Mhm.
Were there other abilities that surprised you or that you thought were used in a very different way?
I think the case of Andy Gallagher and his twin Ansem was a really interesting case in where we saw them have the same ability. They both had that kind of mind control, mental projection. They could suggest, like when Andy's like, I want to take the Impala for a ride. And Dean's like, yeah, go ahead. Which he would never do.
No.
Things like that. So we see Andy doing it in this really kind of harmless way. He's just having a little fun, but he's not hurting anybody. And then we have Ansem using his exact same power for really horrible things, like making a woman pour gasoline on herself, or the guy walk into the front of the bus and stuff. And so it was really, kind of that nature versus nurture thing, I guess, because they had the exact same power, but because they had such different childhoods, they both grew up using that power in such a very, very different way.
I think that's a really good point. And I also think that's a point where it's teaching, it was one of those many points that taught Sam and Dean about, well, not necessarily nature versus nurture, but the fact that if you have powers, you can still be good.
Yes, you're not intrinsically evil right out of the gate just because of that. Exactly.
Right. And I think that that's a lesson they learn a number of times, but particularly in that case, it's just like right there.
Well, and that was a very difficult lesson, especially for Dean to learn. Sam, I think, came to understand it sooner because he really had to. But Dean would have been the first one to recognize that you can have a gun and hold up a convenience store, that's bad, or you can shoot a monster, that's good. It's not the gun, it's what you do with it. And so thinking of the mental powers in the same way you might think of as a kitchen knife or a frying pan, you can hit somebody over the head with it, or you can cook eggs, it becomes much more neutral and something to be less afraid of.
Right.
Just don't cook someone's head with it.
Don't do that. Yeah. We saw a number of folks who were mediums as well, talking to the dead. You mentioned necromancy earlier, which is kind of on the extreme side. So often necromancy we think of as bringing the dead back to life. Mediums just stop in for a chat, or maybe let the spirits possess them to be able to share a story. We saw a number of flavors of that throughout the series. Thoughts or favorites?
I thought sorry, Carol, I thought it was particularly amusing, the guy who, Oliver Price was his name in the episode Inside Man, and where they're they get in touch with Bobby through him to get Bobby to help them do something. Now I can't remember. Now I'm blanking on what they
break into heaven. They wanted to
break. Yeah, they wanted to break into heaven, and that's when that's when Bobby let all the Bobbies out.
The Bobbies are surely. That's a great line.
I love it. And but I thought that was interesting that they were able to use the radio that he had in his little heaven there, where he's reading the Tory spelling book and stuff. And so Sam and Dee were able to talk to him through the radio. And I just thought that's so weird. But it goes back to one of the phenomena that they never explored in the show really was getting telephone calls from dead people. And we never, I mean, there was that one time when it was supposed to be somebody, you know, when Dean got the calls from his dad and stuff, but that was something else. It wasn't.
Is that when they go to the museum and the girl's like, and we're walking, and here's this thing, ooh, because they were talking about like Alexander Graham Bell's phonograph or something.
Alexander Graham Bell really did patent a telephone that he was trying to create a device to talk to the dead. And Thomas Edison had tried to get a creative, like a Victrola style recording device to record the voices of the dead. And in both cases, they had lost somebody they cared about. And so that kind of compelled them to try to find a technological answer. So that's rooted in fact. But and I thought that was kind of interesting when Sam and Dean were able to talk to Bobby via the radio. That's not that far off from so many TV shows, Poltergeist and all those, where the dead use the electronic device, which they've done in a number of Supernatural episodes, haunting the phones or the computers and moving through the wires.
Those are you can get the lights flickering and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, disturbing those electrical currents and everything.
Yeah, that's how they use the EMF. Because it detects those electrical
electromagnetic fields. Yep. Yeah. Exactly. So.
Yeah, the whole mediumship thing is interesting. And then when we get further into the series and we know what heaven and hell were actually like, it kind of makes grabbing a hold of somebody for a conversation seem a little more problematic, because they're not just floating around out there in the ether. They're someplace.
They're someplace. We don't know where, but they're someplace.
Yeah, well,
I liked how they also showed us mediums, kind of the whole range. There was the mediums who were fakes, you know. Was it at Lizzie Borden's and they were like, you know, and it's the step on the thing to thump and this to, and then the draft and for the curtains and stuff. But then they go all the way through, you know, like people who are pretending to be mediums, but then maybe have a real medium experience and are kind of like, whoa.
Well,
you know,
I
just Goldberg and Sister Act or something where they're like, oh wait, something really happened there. To the full-fledged mediums like Pamela, you know, who really did do it and could do it, or the Fox sisters, or you know, there was another one in the Lilydale, the girl, one of the girls who was subsequently attacked, but she was the granddaughter. And
Melanie was the granddaughter.
Yeah, and she didn't even really think, she was doing it more like, I can interpret the body language and I do do all of those, pick out the little clues and stuff. But then she really had something happen, you know, and was like, oh, there really could be something more there that I didn't even think was happening.
Well, and there was a guy who was the bad guy in the Lilydale episode who actually did have abilities and used them wrongly. But he actually, I believe, if I'm remembering right, his abilities were real and he didn't like the way other people were using theirs. Or have I got that wrong?
I just watched that episode.
He viewed the others as his rivals.
He did, and he felt like he wasn't good looking and he couldn't put on enough of a show. And apparently that echoed with the Fox sisters, because there was the one sister who was prettier and was charismatic and that kind of thing. And they really imply in that storyline, the museum director sort of said that the one sister, Kate, had the gift, and she was the charismatic, pretty one, and that Margaret looked after her. But then when they burn Kate's bones, but Margaret still is coming after some of the, after Melanie and the Camille Thibodeau, however you say that, it sort of implied that the ugly sister, if we can be so crass, was the one who really had the power. And it's just that the beautiful sister was the one who got all the praise and everything. And so she was jealous of the beautiful sister. And they,
Fox, oh, go ahead.
They sort of drew a parallel, because that was, if you'll remember, that's when Dean and Sam had separated for a couple weeks or so. And it was also when they were still sort of undercover and not driving baby. And so, and they had been on the outs. And so it was kind of, but I mean, let's face it, you've got two beautiful people there. You know, what can you do? But anyway, but that, I thought that was interesting dynamic that they showed with the sisters and their powers, and getting and circling all the way back to Jimmy Tomorrow, which I thought that was a weird name. He was jealous. He didn't get the recognition. He just didn't seem to be able to project and do a good show. But, and so that's, you know, he got twisted.
The Fox sisters were real, and they were kind of rock stars of their age in that post-Civil War era. And they went on international tour. They were very, they were celebrities. And then at one point, the youngest sister went to the media and said, well, it's all been a fraud. And they died in poverty and obscurity, thanks to her. And they think that there's a theory that they did have originally real talent, but then if you've got to perform every night at 8 o'clock, you've got to start augmenting that real talent with theatrics. And so there is a theory that their success kind of did them in by overcoming what they could marshal natively. So it's a sad tale, even though it didn't play out quite the way it did in the show. One of the other guys we had was in the episode where Sam forgets who he is and wears the cardigan and rawr, who makes everybody believe it's a 1950s perfect little neighborhood, and convinces them all through, I mean, don't drink milkshakes in this show. First it's the milkshakes there, and then it's you know, Mrs. Butter's smoothies after. But now he had an ability to, if not alter reality, to wipe people's minds and or make them forget who they were and think they were somebody else living a different life, which is a pretty scary ability there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was an interesting one. And it was interesting that it worked on Sam, I thought. I mean, obviously it wouldn't work on Cass, but it worked on Sam, and I thought Jared really nailed that with those glasses, and he was great. But that's a very scary ability of mind control, kind of. And this guy had built this whole town, and I guess he just sort of captured people who were coming through town, and that was really, and no cell phones and no way to communicate outside of the town. That was really, yeah, that's scary.
Yeah. And I liked how they led us on to believe, spoiler alert, that it was the daughter. And the daughter did in fact have the same abilities, but she wasn't the one doing it.
Mm-mm.
You
Yeah.
know? So, and once again, here you go, the two of them have the same abilities, but the daughter's not making people live these fake lives. You know, she's
Right.
like, oh, this is not good.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, and I always figured that it worked on Sam because Sam had at one point kind of wanted a normal life, or at least hoped that when they were done with all the hunting, they could have a normal life. Where I'm not sure that pitch would have worked on Dean, but maybe, because we saw what happened with the Jinn. The Jinns really come as more of a supernatural creature, but there's a great deal of mind control involved there in making
Oh, yeah.
people see and live these fantasies.
I got the feeling though that their power of mind control is more biological in nature, you know, because it was like they, you know, didn't have like venom or something that they did to them, as opposed to just being able to sit here and go, okay, now, you know, now do this, now rub my feet, you know. So it's same result, but a different avenue of application.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did we see enough of Patience's abilities to compare and contrast them to Missouri, her grandmother?
I mean, I think we know she had premonitions,
Yeah.
because she saw the attacks coming and stuff like that. We certainly didn't see anything if she had either telepathy or what was Missouri's other thing, or the clairsentience, you know, being able to detect life or energy or anything. The only thing we saw with her is premonition. However, she was a baby psychic, you know, it didn't kick in. She was in high school. One could posit that it's one of those things where it could surface at that kind of cataclysmic time in life. So like, oh, now you're going through adolescence and all these things wake up, you know, that she had gone through her life without any of this. And then all of a sudden started having these visions. And so it could be just she hit that point or whatever. Or, you know, Missouri was able to reach out to her and help trigger it or something. I mean, I don't know, but.
Well, I seem to remember, I think you're right, Carol. And but I do seem to remember that Patience at some point in one of the episodes she was in talking about that when she was a kid, she would have these stuff in her head and her dad would, you know, say, no, you know, don't talk about that or whatever. And just really squashed her abilities. And she just sort of, she tried to tamp them down.
Yeah, she repressed it on her.
Right. And I think, but I also think you're right that my encyclopedia of the paranormal over here said that often psychics are triggered by a traumatic event. You know, and so it could be that the premonition was just something that was very natural for her. But if she had, if we had wayward women or wayward girls or whatever, the spinoff, I think that they would have developed her powers more. I mean, I like to think that because I wanted that spinoff, but I know some people didn't, but I did. And but I'm just really, again, that makes me sad for Missouri because she didn't get to help her granddaughter. And you got to wonder about the dad. Did he have some?
No, I was just going to say, and it skipped him. So it makes you wonder if in her family particularly, was it something that went down through the female line, you know?
Could be.
There's certainly something you hear a lot, you know, in that kind of family. Yeah, because he certainly never had any inkling, or not that they showed us, of anything, you know, disturbing his, you know, and then his whole negative reaction to it, you know.
Yeah.
Didn't want anything to do with it.
You know, it would have been interesting if the hunters could have been a little less paranoid about anything supernatural, to see them team up with psychics against the real bad guys. That if they could have grasped that not everything supernatural was bad, having a psychic help you find things, connect with people, send messages, interview ghosts, there would have been a lot of legwork and dangerous situations that could have been avoided if they could have teamed up and gotten over themselves and not just, tried to kill everybody.
Certainly here you have the example of Bobby, who's very literate, and he may look like a good old boy, but, he's brilliant and, so well learned and so well read and everything that he didn't have a problem just picking up the phone and calling Pamela and, and everything. Then you think about somebody, like Walt and Roy. Walt and Roy. That's a tongue twister.
Yeah, it is.
And they would have probably wanted nothing to do with it. They would have been like, probably, I picture them being just, they're not as sophisticated. They're not used to, I don't know how to say these things tactfully sometimes. They're not as bright as Bobby. And so to them, it was much more that knee-jerk reaction of don't want anything to do with them. Whereas Bobby could see the value, or Rufus, you can picture those people using that kind of asset, but probably not some of the more rank and file hunters.
Well, true. And look at Gordon, who hated Sam, who thought that Sam was a monster because of whatever, and Gordon was on the really far end of that. And I think a lot of hunters, maybe because of usually the traumatic event that got them into hunting, we see that over and over in the show, saw the world of monsters and the supernatural in black and white, a lot like Dean did, until he and Sam kept encountering monsters that weren't bad, or people who had powers that weren't bad.
But even the British men of letters, for all their education, still they used technological things that paralleled abilities, drugs and hypnotic suggestion and those kinds of things. But I don't think they were real keen on partnering with anybody who had actual abilities.
Well, I can't think of any instance where they actually talked about somebody who might have, I guess probably the closest, but that isn't, I'm jumping ahead of myself. The closest we would have seen would have been maybe somebody like Cuthbert, who took matters into his own hand, but then he wasn't even the British men of letters, he was the American men of letters. I don't think I ever heard anything from the British men of letters in terms of how did they view psychics and, or anything like that. It was so immersed all really in technology, which was not uninteresting in its own right. But yeah, I don't know if I would picture them, because they had a really narrow view of everything.
Yeah,
if Ketch could go and kill Magda, who was clearly an innocent, then they must not have any real desire to work with them.
Yeah, so it was the narrow view. There you had people on both sides of the spectrum, the folks who were maybe uneducated and had a very narrow view. And then you have the overeducated Brits, and they're just as narrow-minded. So yeah, this fear of anything that wasn't 100% normal.
Yeah.
Now we had that one instance where Sam moved the dresser to save Dean's life, and then he never had telekinesis again. What did you make of that?
Lazy writing. That's what I made of it.
Oh,
lazy or writing. I feel like, you know, while his gift was maybe primarily premonition, it didn't mean that there may be latent other abilities. But we, you know, because of his reluctance to go further and Dean's obvious reluctance for him to go further, and then once you get past, you know, once you get out of that 5-season Kripke arc, you might as well forget about it, because we never really, at one point I think they like mention it and everybody was like, and it died again.
Well, yeah, and particularly because in the episode where we first see Missouri, at the very end, when they leave and she goes into the room and there's John, and she talks about Sam's gifts, plural.
Right.
And, you know, when I rewatched that one in the last few days, and I was just like, oh, gifts. I don't think I ever noticed that before. And then I thought, well, you know, it was premonition and that one thing with the moving the dresser, but only when Dean was in danger.
But it does make you wonder what other little nuggets were there that
Exactly
could have been teased out and everything.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
they only live on in fan fiction. In fan fiction, all of that stuff gets to get explored, and, you know, did he develop more stuff and so on and so forth.
Let me ask.
No,
go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking back to Cold Oak again, when they talk about, Ava talks about it and then Jake talks about it, flipping the switches, and that once you flip the switches, once you start flipping them, more and more stuff comes in, where Jake had the started off with his super strength. But then when he went ahead and started flipping switches, he started getting mind control, and he could make Ellen hold the gun to her head. And he had all of these other things going on. Ava only had premonitions, but when she started flipping the switches, she could control demons and everything. So had Sam ever gotten to the point where he started flipping the switches, maybe we would have seen more of that. But yeah, we never did. But, you know, certainly it was like, think of like a switchboard, you know, and you've got like, you know,
Right.
Only the trunk line is on, but you could go boop, 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 you know, and turn all these other things on.
Well, is that what the demon blood brought out in Sam? One of those switches?
Well, I think the demon blood installed the switchboard. Because that's Ava
When he was a
and
baby.
all the special kids. They all had demon blood.
Right.
So that's
but when he started
related.
drinking,
Oh, when he started drinking. Well, I think when he started drinking it, he already was having the premonitions way before that.
Well, yeah.
The demon blood only helped him start doing the control.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Was that like maybe one of his gifts, that the demon blood flipped that switch you're talking about? Do you think?
Well, Ruby told him he didn't need a feather to fly,
Yeah.
which made me wonder whether any of the psychic abilities were really because of the demon blood, or if that just jump started them. That maybe those special kids would have still been special and found their way to their gifts at some level without the demon blood, but the demon blood accelerated the abilities. I don't know. They never really make that clear.
Right. But with him, I'm sorry.
It's kind of like the whole Jedi thing. Is it born? Can you learn this? Forget about the midichlorians.
I was gonna say that. But as far as him drinking the blood and getting more powers and control, yeah, that was all just Ruby. He needed something to focus on to make him think he could do it, but he didn't need that to do it.
Yeah.
And she needed to keep him addicted so that she had control of him. So
yeah, she was trying to control him. but it also brought to my mind, you know, of course, he was fed demon blood as a baby, as were the others. But what if somebody like Dean or some other hunter got in league with a different demon who fed them demon blood, like Ruby, I mean, later in life? I mean, it brings to mind what would have happened maybe.
Well, and we know, or at least it's heavily suggested maybe, that some of the American men of letters had some abilities. They at least tinkered with magic, and psychic abilities are kind of one step to the left on magic. You know, if you're gonna if you're going to do spells, how weird is it to read minds? So it does make you think that if Sam could have those abilities, then wouldn't they be latent in Dean as well from the bloodline, because they're both Winchesters
And Campbell.
And yeah, and
Who knows what's back in the Campbell line?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, all kinds of food for thought there.
Yeah. And what about drinking angel blood?
They don't have blood, they have the grace.
Well, they have blood.
You...
Cast bleeds all over. They have as much blood as the demons do, because it's not the demon's actual body either.
Yeah.
Right. That's true, but I guess they never made any claim of the angel blood having anything. Everything was tied up in their grace. It was the grace that gave them. So that's why, like, Cass lost his grace and he was just human.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so there wasn't anything
Yeah.
special going on in their blood.
Which is interesting, because you couldn't withdraw the smoke in the same way from a demon possessed vessel and have them in the same. It didn't work the same for angels and demons. And that's kind of interesting. I think it's a great point, Anne, is would angel blood further psychic abilities? That was a missed opportunity maybe to find out what they could have done.
One of many.
One of many.
And then, you know, one that we haven't really talked about that I've never been really sure about his powers or anything is Sergey. He was a shaman, but did he have any, you know, he's not on SuperWiki's list of, you know, psychics or, you know, that kind of thing, but he definitely had some powers. I mean, although he mostly did magics and used objects, cursed or not,
right,
cursed or blessed, I suppose, but he was an interesting character that they didn't exploit very much.
No,
that might be some part of the distinction that they made in terms of like who is qualifying as more psychic-y versus who's qualifying more witchy, you know.
Yeah,
and
true.
they might have really, since he's using objects and stuff, that maybe he's more in that whole witchy category. Like Rowena, nobody would think, I mean, nobody even remotely associates anything psychic with Rowena. All of her stuff is spells and charms and and all of that. So
even though magic simulates a lot of psychic gifts in that case, in terms of being able to see remotely or control somebody or do many of the other things she's doing with magic, so there's a parallel, but the power is coming from a different place.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
It's like, again, with the British Men of Letters, all their stuff is technological, so it's kind of like which way, you know, which avenue do you go, or which avenue is open to you?
Well, folks, we have once again blown through our time. It always goes so fast. But before we wrap up, please tell everybody where we can find you online. Starting with you, Carole.
I'm here on Facebook as Carole Stokes. You'll find me a lot in the TFWNC group and on continual panels. I'm on Twitter as true_firesign10, and all of my fanfic is on AO3 under firesign10. Mind the tags.
Anne?
You can find me on the continual panels, and at the Team Free Will NC Facebook group, and also on Twitter, I'm Ann Wicker, no spaces. And on Instagram, I'm Ann.Wicker2. And then I'm on Facebook just under Ann Wicker. So I'm easy to find.
I'm pretty easy to find too, gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok, Instagram as one name or the other, pretty easy to find that way. I run the Supernatural TFWNC group here on Facebook, and I'm a staff columnist for the Winchester Family Business, but most of the time I'm here on Continual. So thank you both for being wonderful panelists and having a great discussion. And thank you for watching and listening. We'll have more Supernatural panels coming up soon, so we'll see you online.